Welcome to the MLA Works Cited tutorial. Our tutorial today focuses in on essentially giving credit to our sources. You'll notice here some of the reasons for why we use citations, and MLA is really the rule book that we're required to use for that in Minnesota in our high schools. So to frame our thinking around what we've talked about within the year, we've done a lot of work as a class with in-text citations. Remember, that's where you're taking words from an outside source and blending it into your ideas. Usually we use this as evidence to back up arguments or claims that we are making. That would be our in-text citations. That's where you use that right within your paper. Usually, again, just to point out, we wouldn't be numbering this. This would be blended into your paragraphs, but then your works cited goes at the end of your paper. And the purpose of this is as someone is reading, maybe they notice an idea that you bring up, a statistic you referenced, the works cited lets them know where to go to learn more about that source or check the validity. Again, that allows them to read what you read or find additional information. It also helps support your claim and proves that you are credible. So the thing we want to remind us of, we are using the MLA 8th edition. That was recently published, and you really need to make sure if you're using any outside tools to check your work on rules for formatting, you need to make sure it's that 8th edition. We've included the link here, and you can go back through the PowerPoint to follow that link. So as you make your citations, make your works cited, here are the steps that I'd recommend that you follow. The most time consuming, the trickiest is really how you gather that information. So we'll talk about that together, but we're gonna start with step 1, setting up our page for that works cited. So this step is really basic because the title is always going to be works cited. That's just a part of the formatting. And we need to make sure to center it rather than doing the really slow type over like I know some of you like to do. The way that we would do this is by using the formatting. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a space. I'm going to go back over to left indent or left formatting. So that was really a piece of cake. Now we're diving into that bigger work of gathering the required information. And in this, there's really too many specific rules to just remember, so I'm going to encourage you to use a guide. Earlier in the year, we passed out this tool, and it's really the MLA handbook guide for the type of information that you need. The tricky part is knowing how and where to look for that information. So we'll look at a few examples. One thing that I want you to keep in mind is you have to pay attention to that end punctuation. Notice after each piece of information you punctuate it either with a comma or a period. So we are going to follow the link to see a couple examples. So on the page, what they've done is they've taken that same tool with those 9 items that you need to find, and they show you where you would look for it in a source. So this first source or example source is an essay in a book collection. So with this, what it is that we're referencing is actually the essay. So what we would use is the author of that specific essay. Notice we do last name, comma, first name, and then we use a period. That guide reminds you to use a period, and we would use the title of the actual essay that we're referencing. That would be if I used a quote from in this essay. So I've got the author of it, the title of it. The container is that bigger thing that the essay is a part of. That's the book that it belongs in. And so that's where it's called the Cambridge Companion of Jane Austen. That's what you would really see on the outside of the book. Other contributors, if you look here, this is where we're going to use the editors. Remember, they aren't the ones that wrote it. That's the person who wrote the essay, but the editors help put together that whole collection, and so they still get credit. This source doesn't have a version, doesn't have a number, but we do have a publisher and a publication date. In books, we find that on our publication page at the front of the book. Notice we do the company, we do the year. Location in this case is the pages that we are using. So I want to point out each one of those things that we found: author, title, container, contributors, publisher, date, location, all of those go into my works cited. So we're going to look at another example. This would be a video on a website. Now, they've already gone through. Notice we don't have an author. So we would just skip on down to the next part, looking at the title of the source. In this case, it's the title of the video. So I would type that whole title. That would go into my information that I'm using. The next thing I look for is the title of the container. Now, this isn't a book, but it's a big website, and then the video is just a part of it. So the title of the website would be NASA's Journey to Mars videos. It's the section of the website that it comes from. In this case, our other contributor, we would look usually down at the bottom on websites. If you think about the publication page, websites, there's usually publication information at the bottom. So that's where I find other contributors. In this case, again, we have an editor, don't have a version or number. We do have a publisher, publication date, notice, date, month, year, and location would be the link that you find it from. That's something to think about whenever you have a digital or online source. So our last example is an academic journal article that also is online. It's like it has two containers. So again, we start out with our author. Notice they gave our information here, last name, comma, first name. Title of the source is the article title. Container is that larger source that it's a part of, the African American Review. In this case, it's the academic journal that it's a part of. There aren't other contributors. We don't have a version, but we do have a number. Now, this whole section of number has to do when we're talking about specific academic articles. You would find this when we're doing usually database searches. You might find these. We don't have publisher information. We have a date, but location, there are two things. That's that academic article. So we've got the page number that it's from, but there's also the bigger container or the container that we search for this in. This is where we use the database. We used EBSCO. Then the location for this would be that link. All right, so we have completed the step of gathering our needed information. And now we are ready to move on to our final steps, alphabetizing and formatting. All right, so again, we are back to our sample. We've got the same information that we were looking at with those examples. We need to alphabetize. Now, you always look at whatever the first letter is, whether that's an author's name or whether that's a source. And so if I look here, see, this would be first. I am just using a cut and paste. So I'm doing Control X to cut. Oops. And then I'm going to use Control V to print. All right, so I've got these in place. My next step is formatting. Remember, we need a hanging indent. And so that's where I'm going to come up to the top here. This controls where I start things. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this to 1/2 inch. I moved the whole text over, but remember, hanging indent means our first line is moved over. So notice I did all three at once. Other parts of formatting, we always need Times New Roman, size 12, double spaced, and there we go. Oops, I forgot one thing. I need to make sure to get my title the same size too. Now there we go. We have our completed work cited. Always good to double check our work, but it's looking good. Nice job, people.